Hey there everyone, Pal here, and welcome back to World of Warships. Today it's time for another premium ship review, and we're going to be looking at the Tier 7 German battleship, the Scharnhorst. Before we go ahead, I'm trying a different format of this, going to try and keep these 15 to 20 minutes long, so I'm going to be interlacing gameplay footage and with port view footage as we go over everything and just try to talk about it in general. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, if this format's better or if the longer format where we do port and then gameplay is more informative and more enjoyable. I'm going to guess this is going to be the better one though. So, the Scharnhorst. The Scharnhorst follows kind of a lot of the changes they've been doing with the premium ships and mixing things up a good bit more than the normal ships. You used to have things like the Murmansk, which was very much just a slightly modified Omaha, but starting with around, I would say, probably the Molotov, things have gotten a little more interesting, where they take and they make some just kind of absurd ships, and then they try to balance them out to keep them from being OP or underpowered or anything like that. So you have the Molotov, the Belfast, and the Scharnhorst kind of all fit in this, where they have a very unique play style to them in terms of a premium ship. What this means for the Scharnhorst is it has surprisingly small battleship guns. 283 millimeters to be exact. Now it does have 9 of them, 9 in, well, total 3 triple turrets, for a total of 9. 283 millimeters for perspective. The Colorado, the American Tier 7 battleship, has 406 millimeters. The Nagato, the Japanese Tier 7 battleship, has 410 millimeters. So well over 100 millimeters smaller, basically a third smaller, a little more than a third smaller than its competition. The Tier 7 German non-premium battleship, the Genesau, whatever it is 380 millimeters. So not as big as the Americans, but still a good bit, almost 100 millimeters bigger than the Scharnhorst. Obviously, with these smaller shells does come some benefits, though. You get reload speed of 20 seconds, where most battleships are more in around that 30-second mark. And you also get a turret rotation of 22.8 seconds, non-modified, 22.8 seconds. That does have the captain's skill, so it's closer to like 24 seconds by default, or 23.7 by default without the captain's skill for the turret rotation, where normally you can be looking 30 to 35 seconds for 180 degree turret rotation. So you have reasonably fast firing, reasonably quick turning cannons that are on the smaller caliber but still very much battleship caliber. By comparison, the highest end cruiser would be the German, I believe. Excuse me, the German Tier 10 cruiser, which has 220 millimeter cannons, and most at that higher tier are actually 203 millimeters. In with the Japanese and the American line, the British line is obviously much smaller at 152, I believe, off the top of my head. So they're bigger. Basically, what you're looking at is if you have a line of cruiser to battleship and caliber range, you're kind of in the middle. You're about 30% bigger than the cruisers, but 30% smaller than the battleships. In terms of rate of fire, you're about 30% slower than the cruiser, but about 30% faster than the other battleships. In terms of turret rotation, you're about 30% slower than cruisers, but about 30% faster than battleships. You're kind of right in that middle area, but you are a battleship. And that's the one key thing of this ship. This is not a battle cruiser. It is a battleship. Outside of its guns, the rest of its stats are across the board in line with all the other battleships in terms of survivability. 56,300. A good bit more than the Tier 7 Colorado, a good bit less than the Nagato, and right in there in line with the other German battleship at the Genesau. Genesau is like 58,200, fully upgraded. The Japanese one's a little over 60,000, and the Colorado's right around 50,000. So you're kind of in that middle area in terms of survivability. The armor profile on this thing is actually really good. It's a good bit like the Tirpitz. It has a great little cover over its citadel. In fact, the citadel itself is very well protected. It's low into the water. The only part above the water is a little bit of a ramped area that actually knocks projectiles away from the citadel, so anything coming in right at the waterline is likely to bounce up, but there's a little turtle armor over top of it, which gives the citadel some really good protection. Your front and bow armor is acceptable at, let's see if I can get the current the crosshair out of the way. There we go. 70 millimeter bow armor and everything. You're looking at belt armor, 350 millimeter. Now, similar to other German battleships, you don't have the best torpedo belt protection, only 25%. Or I'm sorry, 24%. It's 1% lower than I would have thought. So you don't want to be taking torpedoes, but that's general. You don't want to take torpedoes in any battleship if you can avoid it. But you do have survivability. You also have surprisingly good speed. Top speed with no flags mounted is 30 knots. By comparison, the Colorado is at like 21 knots fully upgraded. The Gato is 25 knots fully upgraded. The Geneseo is a little bit faster, fully upgraded. It's at like 32.8, 31.8, so right around 32 knots, a little bit faster than this. What does this all add up to? Well, it adds up to a battleship that's not great at fighting other battleships, but is amazing at wrecking cruisers. It just eats cruisers all day, every day, which is awesome with the current meta. If you watched my video I put out last week, getting back into World of Warships, looking at how everything's played out right now, I talk about how they've introduced the British cruiser line, which has thrown things kind of in a loop. Basically, a lot of people are playing this cruiser line, which means there's a lot fewer destroyers, just because people are playing fewer destroyers, but also these cruisers are great at rocking destroyers. So destroyer play is down, there's fewer torpedoes, cruiser play is up, which this thing's awesome at destroying. Cruiser play is also up with cruisers that don't have high explosives, so you're not going to be getting set on fire. And while this ship's strength is not going against battleships, it does have the survivability that if you do have to fight a battleship, they're going to have a tough time destroying you. And while your guns, if they are angled, you're going to have a tough time penning them, and you're really not going to get a lot of citadels against them. If an enemy battleship is dumb enough to show you their broadside, while you're not going to citadel them often, you are going to penetrate them with these 283s. They are enough to penetrate equal tier battleships with that caliber artillery. And if they do not show you the broadside, you do have reasonably good high explosive damage. While the base damage is only 3,200, you do have a 20% chance of setting fire with them. So you can just fire high explosive at a battleship that doesn't want to show you the broadside. Every 20 seconds, you're going to light fires with these shells. Now, if there was one area where I'd say the Scharnhorst is a little lacking, it is in secondary armament. By about this tier, definitely by tier 8, secondary batteries start to become pretty powerful on battleships overall. Not entirely, but overall. They start to be able to reach out there, really engage destroyers as they're coming in. And in that area, the Scharnhorst is a bit light. It only has 2, 4, 6, 8? No. 2, 4, 6. 150 millimeters on each side. It also has 605 millimeters on each side with 2 additional 105 in the back. Those can also be put up, they work as dual purpose AA guns. You really just don't have a huge amount of secondary firepower. The secondaries, the max range in them is also fully unupgraded 5.3 kilometers. So you're not reaching out with these. But it's not that big of a deal because you have 2 things going for you. One, you have turrets that turn really fast and fire really fast, so you don't need secondaries to deal with cruisers that get in too close. You can fire every 20 seconds, and you can track them with these fast-turning turrets. You also have torpedoes. Now, these aren't quite as good as the Tirpitz torpedoes, but they are pretty solid. They have a 6-kilometer range. They're mid-mounted, so you can fire them off on either side. There's 3 on each side. And while you're probably not going to get a huge amount of damage out of these guys, they are enough to dissuade ships from coming too darn close to you on your broadsides and keep them away from really dropping on top of you too close. So, yeah, your secondaries aren't great. Your AA's not great, but it is acceptable. So, when you take all this and put it together, there's 2 scenarios, well, there's several scenarios, but 2 scenarios you're going to come across most often. And most of the gameplay you've been watching in the background is this first scenario, and I'm sure everyone that's played a decent bit of this game has been in this situation. The map starts off and everybody lemmings one way. In this case, we're all heading to the northwest. And this works if the enemy fleet also is on that northwest side and you get into this big big fight back and forth. However, you run into trouble if the enemy fleet separates a little more evenly, and if in this case, their fleet in the northwest side is able to slow and stall our people, their ships coming down on the east side are going to overrun our eastern flank. And this is most of what you've been seeing. And that's exactly what happens here. Basically, 4 cruisers and a battleship come down the eastern flank. Our group that's heading northwest stalls out. They run into enough resistance that they don't punch through for whatever reason. We don't actually see that part of the battle take place. In this situation, I tend to be one of the ones that I turn around and I go back and I try to help the side that's getting overrun. Basically, you got to stop that push, otherwise they're going to end up on the cap and they're going to outcap you before you can break through and push onto their cap. And if you're in a destroyer, you're able to turn around and get back down there pretty quick. You're able to tend to drop torpedoes, but you have to be very cautious because when there's 2, 3, 4 cruisers pushing, once you're detected, you're probably dead. So as a destroyer, you're probably not going to stop this push. At most, you can slow it down. You can make them be like, oh, there's torpedoes out in front of me. Let's evade, and it's going to take us a little bit longer to get to the cap. If you're a cruiser, you're able to turn around, you're able to get back down there, but you're going to get detected, and 3, 4 cruisers and a battleship versus 1 cruiser, you're just going to lose. There's no way you're going to win that. At most, you're a roadblock or a speed bump on the road for them getting to the cap. With most standard battleships, you're going to turn around and it's going to take you a long time to get there. Every 30 seconds you have the range, you'll be able to fire off a salvo and you'll hope for the best, but most battleships don't have great accuracy, 18 plus kilometers out, and you're only going to be doing 22, 25 knots. It's going to take you a long time to get into this fight. The Scharnhorst shines like it's amazing how good this ship is in this situation. You get turned around, you're doing 30 knots. You're going to be able to cover that distance, get back and support your team quickly. You're able to put out fire at a good range, 20 kilometers, every 20 seconds. And while the dispersion on the German battleships isn't great, it's good enough that when you're firing 9 projectiles every 20 seconds, you're going to be able to start whittling down targets. And if you hit a cruiser, even if you're only doing the normal roll damage, the normal penetration damage, 7,700 damage is still pretty darn good. Or 7,600, I forget what it actually is. I think it's 7,700, 7,600 damage. But once you do get within range, then when you get to that 11, 12 kilometer mark, the Scharnhorst just comes alive. Every 20 seconds, you're putting out salvos, and you're going to be penetrating these cruisers. You're going to be citadeling these cruisers, and they're going to be firing back at you, but you have the HP pool, you have the repair kits in order to survive and take that punishment that a cruiser can't. And the footage here speaks for itself, and this isn't the only time I've done this. This is the most damage I've gotten out of doing this, I think, and it's probably the best example, but I'm able to come in here and basically we're able to take out 4 cruisers and stop another battleship from capping and hold off and win this battle, and we shouldn't have won it. And had I been in a Colorado, the team that was down here, they would have overrun the guys before I got there, and I would have sailed into there in a Colorado 1v4, 1v5, and they would have just burned me down. I probably would have taken 1 or 2 of them with me, but they would have burned me down. Now, I don't do it solo. A friendly Belfast does come in, and the Belfast does provide a good bit of fire support, especially on the Scharnhorst that shows up, but it does that, and it really does show the strength of this battleship. You want to take this battleship, you want to hunt cruisers. The other footage you're going to be seeing is very much the worst case scenario for this battleship, and that is a Tier 9 battle on the open ocean map. Worst case scenario. The other team has an Iowa. They have 2 heavy gunboats. They also have a Fubuki destroyer. So they got torpedoes. They got rapid fire high explosive cannons. They have rapid fire armor piercing cannons because they have the Neptune on their team. They also have the battleship that you just don't want to mess with at that tier. Tier 7 up against a Tier 9 battleship. It's just a bad situation to be in. But even in this worst case scenario, the Scharnhorst still can hold his own. Now, you have to play him smart. The armor profile, as we went over, is very good on this ship, and she's a sleek ship. She's big, she's long, but she is sleek. So if you keep track, and as long as the enemy team doesn't completely surround you, and you can keep your bow in towards whoever is primarily focusing on you, especially battleships, you can wither a surprisingly good amount of fire and come out of it okay on the other side. You'll even see part here where I come across the enemy Iowa and he's focused on 2 friendly battleships further off. I realize his guns are not aiming at me, so I go ahead, I turn mostly broadside to him, get all 3 of my cannons firing, and while my damage, I'm not going to Citadel him. I'm not going to Citadel in Iowa without a very lucky roll of the pen coming through, like just a lucky projectile hitting. I'm not going to Citadel him. I am going to penetrate him. We're going to get good bit of penetration where we're going to get the full 7,700 damage out of it. And while if he would turn and shoot at me, his shells would do like 14,000 damage, and mine are only doing 7,000 damage, I'm able to shoot every 20 seconds, and it does add up pretty quickly to heavy damage done on this guy. Though, even in this situation, the Iowa, the other battleships in this area, they are not my primary target. I'm okay with them firing at me as long as I'm angled. My target is firing at any cruiser that's dumb enough to show its broadside to me. I'm watching for those cruisers that are coming out of turns and they think, all right, I have time to turn. Well, guess what, sucker? I can fire every 20 seconds. I'm going to hit you and I'm going to make you pay for it. And that's what you can really do with this Scharnhorst. Get yourself in a good position. Keep your bow towards whatever the biggest guns are firing at you. Dump torpedoes on anything that really gets in too close. And look for those cruisers that are showing their broadside and make them pay. When there's no cruiser showing broadside, look for the battleship showing broadside. And while they're not going to pay, you are going to hurt them. And 9 cannons firing every 20 seconds for 7,600 damage, it's going to be enough to help your team win. And at the end of this battle, I actually came out second from top on our team as a tier 7 in a tier 9 battle. Worst case scenario, no cover, nothing like that. Still did very well. The Scharnhorst is a terrific ship. It really is. Now, it lends itself to a certain playstyle. If you want to just sit back at long range in a battleship, well, first of all, don't be that battleship. Nobody likes that battleship. Get in there and help your cruisers. But if that's what you want to do, the Scharnhorst is not for you. Its range just isn't long enough, and at that range, it's just not accurate enough, and you're not going to get many penetrations at that range on other battleships. This guy, you got to get into that 11 to 15 kilometer range. 8 to 12 kilometer range is really where you absolutely shine against other cruisers. But anywhere from 8 to 12, 8 to 15 kilometers is where you want to be on this guy. For me, I kind of really like this ship because I've always had issues with the battleships, especially the early tier battleships. They're just too slow for me, and they fire too slow. Both slow in terms of how fast they ship, but also you fire and then you spend 30 seconds looking for targets, planning your next lined up shot. Fire, you get a bad roll, and shots go high, shots go low, bad dispersion. And I should be clear, when I say roll, I don't mean there's dice rolls going on in the background for how much damage you're going to do. I'm talking about the dispersion is just, you have no control over that. So that's what I mean by a roll. So you fire, you get a bad dispersion pattern, you completely miss, and then you're doing nothing for the next 30 seconds but prioritizing your next target. The Scharnhorst, you're a lot more involved. You're sailing it a lot more like a cruiser. You're up at a high speed, 30 kilometers. You're able to turn, you're able to keep your turrets on target tracking, and you're able to fire every 20 seconds. So if you're someone that likes cruiser gameplay, you're someone that enjoys playing, that type of play style, but you never could get into battleships, the Scharnhorst is probably the closest thing you're going to get. It's that battleship experience with enough cruiser mix in to keep things interesting. You have the battleship survivability with almost cruiser rate of fire guns, but you have battleship penetration against cruisers. It's a good all-around mix for that. You have to know what you're getting into. You have to play it to its strengths. If you just go out and sail broadside to battleships and shoot back and forth at them, the higher caliber battleships are going to punish you. They're going to wreck you at that range. They're going to Citadel you. You're going to pen them, but you're not going to Citadel them. You got to get in close. Use your weapons to your best advantage. Focus on the cruisers, and then when the cruisers are down, then focus on the battleships when they give you the opportunity. I do highly recommend this ship, though, if that's the type of playstyle you're looking for, if that's the type of thing you like, or if you just want to mix it up. I enjoy this ship so much more than I enjoy the Tirpitz. I think the Tirpitz, while it's a more powerful ship, more damage out of the guns, less accurate, I would say, this ship just, it's more enjoyable to play. I have a better time, more enjoyable gameplay playing this than I do the Tirpitz. I think that about does it, and wow, we're right at about that 20-minute mark, so knock on wood, hopefully this works out to be a pretty good video. Those are my thoughts on the Scharnhorst. Until next time, though, this has been Paller. Thanks for watching.